Hi there, and welcome to Ancestral Recall. I'm your host, Eli Kaplan. This is a web series that chronicles 20 years of Magic's history. Today, we're continuing our in-depth examination of Alpha, Beta, and Unlimited, the first ever Magic sets. These are the sets that define the 5 colors of Magic and cause countless innovations down the line. And this show is also dedicated to the top of the color wheel. White. White is the color of order, light, healing, defense, and purification. White is the color of tactics, battlefield ingenuity, and rapid attack. Soldiers, clerics, angels, and beasts of the field populate the color. White does not always do good, but it does share the model of an organized, polite society that looks after its own. That's usually good by modern standards. The problem is that it claims to know when to sacrifice the fruits of the harvest in order to preserve the greater good. If you are unsure of your worthiness, do not test a white mage's morale. Jean-Luc Picard and Superman are classic examples of white protagonists. Sarah, Elspeth, and Ajani are archetypes of different elements of white. Sarah is the great protector. Elspeth is the virtuous leader of battle, and Ajani is the tenacious defender. White has had its share of bad guys as well as good guys, for what it's worth. Kamigawa's Daimyo Konda is the most well-known white antagonist. He sought to bring all of Kamigawa, spirit and flesh, under his thumb, and he wasn't that far from succeeding. Elish Norn? Okay, I don't really think that Elish Norn is all that white feeling. Sorry. Outside of Magic, Ozymandias from Watchmen is a classic white antagonist. The scary thing about Ozymandias is, nope, not going to go through with it. Despite being 25 years old, I'm not going to spoil that story for anyone. Even if the Zack Snyder film's change the end is a little bit disappointing. You know what I'm talking about. The classic creature types of white are humans. Soldiers, clerics, knights, and beasts of the field. Other key humanoid races are the Leonin, catfolk, the Kor, natives of Zendikar, and the Aven, birdmen. Well, they're mostly birds that can walk on 2 legs if they have to, and they carry big swords. In recent years, white has also gotten support from Kithkin, Magic's equivalent of D&D's halflings, and spirits, representing the beneficent souls of the dead. Angels are sentient, animated incarnations of pure white mana. Well, not always pure, in that they can also take aspects of other colors, but white's pure, for a given value of whatever purity happens to be. There are archons, which are essentially agendered angels, and on rare occasion dragons, but angels dominate the mind space of white as far as large creatures go. Magic's angels can be very protective, but they can also embody the elements of holy martial wrath. White's spells do different things. You can enchant a creature so that it leaves the fight, or you can just eradicate it with mana. White is also the absolute best at preventing damage to its creatures or players. Green prevents damage to creatures by just growing the creature so it can take it, but white stops the damage outright. This is relevant in a world with Death Touch. White specializes in tactical creature abilities such as First Strike, Double Strike, Lifelink, and Banding, which I'm actually going to explain to you today. God damn it. I hate explaining banding. White can also destroy enchantments or artifacts, though in 2014 it's much better at destroying enchantments. White is also the premier life gain color, with green at a close second. White has the ability to find answers for just about anything, but many of White's answers, to quote Mark Rosewater, have answers. That wasn't true in 1993, though. Alpha had 45 white cards, and Beta and Unlimited added the missing 46th, Circle of Protection Black. Of these 46 cards, 11 are creatures. That's less than blue, and it's the least of all the colors. White has an overwhelming 22 enchantments, and the rest are instants for the most part, with a few really powerful sorceries. This established the theme of fortification, a trend for white that has since been downplayed over time. The most recent block, Theros, has emphasized fortification to some degree with Bestow, but that doesn't make up for the downgrade for enchantments, at least by the pure numbers. The enchantments have mostly gotten better over the years, as Wizards has recognized the issues of inherent card disadvantage that traditionally come with auras, but they're fewer in number. One noteworthy thing you may notice today about these white cards is the mana symbol. The original white mana symbol was a blazing sun, with less stylized curvy edges. 4th edition introduced the jagged sun symbol, which has persisted to this day. It's a testament to the game's sound artistic design that only one mana symbol has had to get redesigned in 20 years. I personally much prefer the spiky lines of the new white mana symbol, It captures the eyes much more. With white, let's look at the spells first, and then the creatures. Let's start off with white's most powerful cards, the sorceries. White is the color that claims to make things fair by resetting the board, but it always does so in its favor. After all, if you're not getting any advantage, why play the spell? The most famous spell in white that does this is Wrath of God, which destroys all creatures. No regeneration allowed. Sorry, Upton Troll. Both white and black get access to this effect these days, but it gets printed far more often in white than in black. Red does the same kind of thing with mass damage like Earthquake or Starstorm. Wrath is a signature effect of white control decks, and when I talk about any board sweeper that has white in its casting cost, like Day of Judgment or Supreme Verdict, I still call it a Wrath. The next balancing card is Armageddon. This spell destroys all lands in play. Unlike Wrath of God, which has long been a card that makes formats healthy, Armageddon has only seen one major variant, Ravages of War from Portal 3 Kingdoms. There are a few other variants, including Catastrophe, and Red has some spells like this, like Obliterate. But Armageddon, as a spell, is ridiculously undercosted. There are other cards that can destroy all lands, but they're printed very rarely, as Wizards knows how unfun it feels when your opponent is in the lead and then takes out any chance you have to resist. Yes, it's possible to slowly rebuild, but it's unlikely. Armageddon was extremely hard to recover from. Geddon is the textbook example of a card that keeps your opponent from recovering while you have board advantage. It's extremely rare that Wizards print effects like this for standard these days. And then there was Balance. Balance ignored artifacts, but forced players to sacrifice cards in hand, lands, and creatures to match the person with the least. The obvious initial build was to use Moxen to ramp up your mana base and repeatedly destroy enemy resources with Balance. When Ice Age came out, Balance immediately latched on to Zuranorb, an artifact that allowed players to sacrifice lands. That way, Balance became a true Armageddon. I've said before in other episodes that the biggest mistake that Wizards made in the early days was reprinting Balance in 4th edition. Balance decks were the dominant archetype during that time, even without the Moxen. 94 and 95 was the era of Magic that had the most powerful spells, coupled with the least powerful creatures. And after Balance left Type 2, that was it. There are a few occasional references to it, though, like Cataclysm, which thankfully left players' hands intact, and Time Spirals restore balance, but that spell had the drawback of making players wait for 6 turns before the Reckoning happened. 6 turns? Yeah, that's an insanely long time. I'm really happy that balance effects are gone, because they were bad for the game. Swords to Plowshares was another balanced removal spell. Its drawback, giving opponents life, was still fair because of the incredibly cheap cost of the spell. Swords to Plowshares is also the first card to exile creatures, keeping them out of the game forever. Yes, the exiled zone, as we know it today, was created originally for the sake of flavor. Creatures just give up the will to fight. Swords also turned out to be a really relevant effect against black mages, who could otherwise use Animate Dead to return the dead to play. The closest analog is Conflux's Path to Exile, which gives opponents a free basic land instead of life. Casual players are probably very happy the Conspiracy added many more copies of this cube staple into the market. From the famous, here we go to the obscure. Blaze of Glory is a cool-sounding name and has an amazing flavor. One lone soldier up against an entire army, holding them off for the good of the many. But Blaze of Glory's actual utility isn't all that great. Alpha had one creature that was able to block 2 creatures surprisingly, Two-Headed Giant of 4 Eyes, which was in red. Now, There are a few white cards that can block multiple creatures inspired by this. My pick is probably Hundred-Handed One from Theros. He reminds me of E Honda from Street Fighter with his 100-hand slap. Life gain in white started off very conservatively priced. It was horrible. Look at Farmstead. With an initial investment of 5 mana before you gain the first life, this card is just pathetically inefficient. I wonder if this card is a scathing critique on the social utility and the economic squalor that was feudal Europe between the fall of Rome and the Renaissance. Or maybe Richard Garfield didn't want games to go long, so he nerfed life gain. My money's on the historical critique. Consecrate Land protected one land from the pillaging power of land destruction, which just meant that all your other lands had to go instead. But at least this spell is an answer to a stack of Psychic Venoms, plus Icy Manipulator. White has printed C, regenerate target creature in both green and white. The first one is Death Ward. You may not have known this because Death Ward has been an underpowered card from the very beginning. These days, white is tertiary in regeneration behind green and black, and has to do it with spells, not with creatures. If you've been watching my show for a while, you guys know that I still think of Disenchant as being in white, even though I know that it's been moved into green as primary with Naturalize. Disenchant was an utterly dominant spell in 94 and 95 in tournaments, when most dominant threats were enchantments and artifacts. But with a shift towards making creatures matter in 97 with Tempest, Disenchants became less crucial. White and black both shared reanimation. White could bring someone back from the dead, fully healed and healthy, but only from its own side. Black's reanimated fighters came back from wherever, but they came back not quite right. And black mages got to do it for half the cost. Life's unfair like that. The other day, I had a conversation with another old school player who told me that Healing Salve was a good card. Now, I'm sorry. Healing Salve is the worst of the boons. Healing Salve is great when it's reusable, as in the case of Samite Healer, but at that point it falls afoul of modern design sensibilities due to New World Order. Now, if you want a scalable life effect, there's Guardian Angel, which can prevent X damage, or you can gain life with it, which makes it more versatile than Green's Stream of Life. White also got a few other sneaky tricks. Righteousness will allow a blocker to take down virtually any creature in the set. Taking down the Lord of the Pit with a Scrib Sprite sounds truly epic. Reverse Damage was overcosted by today's standards, but it could handle spells. A later sequel, Awestrike, which only worked with creatures, did the same for just 1 white mana, but at the time, Fireball, Disintegrate, and Earthquake, the 3 original red X spells, were very dominant in the early metagame, so Reverse Damage was actually played a fair amount. While I didn't quite pick up on it at the time, it was true that white was the best at supporting a creature with auras. There was an entire cycle of wards, auras that gave a creature protection from a specific color for 1W. They were incredibly narrow and fell prey to the problem of getting 2 for 1 with instant speed removal, but the wards fit the theme of white's protecting its stuff. The fix for the wards later on was giving a creature protection from the color of its choice. There was also Holy Strength, which got mirrored in black by Unholy Strength. Holy Armor could make a creature virtually impervious to damage, but didn't give any power benefit. Lance gave a creature first strike. Overpriced. The most popular aura, though, was Blessing, which could shovel through damage in games that ran long. This card always went late when I was playing M14 drafts. If you want to pump your squad, white is the color to go to. Crusade pumps all white creatures in play, and when you leave your creatures on defense, Castle makes them very hard to kill. Now, I know the Castle's bit about attackers losing the bonus feels bad, but it's such great flavor. Only those within the Castle's walls get its shielding favor. So white was the color of hosing. If you could get a Circle of Protection against your opponent's monocolor deck, they were in some serious trouble. For 1 mana per use, turning a damage source off is incredibly effective. The circles have had some spin-offs, such as the Spheres from Onslaught and the Cycling Runes from Saga Block, which required white mana, not colorless, to keep running. White could even hose itself with Circle of Protection White, a color positioning that is pretty unusual. The circles lasted all the way through 8th edition, except for Red and Black, who got another 2-year lease with 9th, but I'm really happy that they left. Circles were an extremely heavy-handed approach to metagaming. But that's not all! White had the most vicious hosers around. Against red mages, white could transform their mountains into plains with conversion. Yeah, You're never going to be able to pay for anything again. Real fun, huh? Since there were very few ways for Red to get around this, it was almost an auto win for White if they could stabilize the board. And then there's Karma. Karma is one mean mother. This vine choked the life out of Black mages, dealing them 1 damage for each of their swamps on their upkeep. The only way for Black to deal with this was Nevi's Disc. Karma puts Black mages on a clock that's incredibly hard to deal with, and I wish the Karma had never been printed. In my first 3 tournaments, I died to Karma 3 times. It was incredibly miserable feeling. But I suppose that's payback for all the mind twists I played on people. Oh, and in even more spite towards Black, there were 2 creatures that hated swamps. White Knights, obvious, and had a mirror. But there was also Northern Paladin. This guy could destroy any Black permanent for only 2 mana and had Hill Giant stats to boot. In the matchup of White on Black, White throws proportionate action out the door. Another card that solidified White's defenses was Island Sanctuary. This card will let you trade a draw during your draw step into a moat, preventing non-flyers or island walkers from getting through. Note, you only need to skip 1 draw. Getting Howling Mine out still keeps the cards coming and creates a win condition with a 2-card combo, so long as your opponent doesn't have a way to avoid getting decked out. And you're still obliged to deal with any flyers your opponent plays. If you want to see a narrowly designed card in ABU, Animate Wall fits the bill quite nicely. This aura allows a single wall to attack. Since walls usually have pretty aggressively costed stats, as a trade-off for not being able to attack, it makes sense to have a workaround. In modern Magic design, the way to get around this is abilities that have defenders lose their defender ability temporarily for a mana cost. If you're really interested in animating walls, then check out Wakestone Gargoyle. It allows all your walls to animate for just 2 mana. I don't know why, but one of the staples of D&D games has been talking walls. Sometimes the DM needs an interactive source of information for players that is contextually possible in the story that players aren't trying to kill. I mean, why try to kill a wall? Talking walls are a staple of D&D, so it makes sense to have a card that creates one in Magic, a game that finds so much of its primary inspiration in D&D. So, what can you animate with Animate Wall? In White, there's only one. Wall of Swords is a 3/5 flyer and is the best of the walls in Alpha. Yeah, I know, Wall of Stone is 0/8, but it lacks power and thus doesn't really deter attacking creatures the same way Wall of Swords does. The only flyers that Wall of Swords can't deal with are Mamodi Jinn and Shivan Dragon. The common white creatures are, in a word, petite. Banalish Hero is a 1/1 for white that has banding. Now, I've been avoiding doing it for 25 episodes, so now I have to pay the piper. I actually have to teach you what banding is. Banding is actually 2 different abilities, both dealing with combat damage assignments. The first is banding while blocking. So let's look at a situation that's simple, without banding. Here we see a War Mammoth attacking into 2 Mons Goblin Raiders. The Mammoth has Trample, so its controller decides to deal 1 to each Goblin and 1 to the defending player. Pretty clear, right? Right. If a creature with banding blocks a creature alone, then the opponent gets to assign damage the way he wants. Trample comes through. Banding is irrelevant there. But if a banding creature and any other combination of creatures, banding or not, blocks an attacker, the defender gets to assign the order in which combat damage is assigned and how much damage is assigned as well. So, if Phage the Untouchable attacks, and you have a Banalish Hero, a Squire, and a Serra Angel that blocks Phage, you can have Phage assign damage to Squire first, assigning 4 damage to the Squire. It dies. Phage then takes 6 damage and dies. Even if Phage got Trample, you get to assign the damage any way you want between the blockers and yourself. Okay, got that? Good. Because here's the next part of banding. Banding on attack allows attackers to distribute damage blockers dealt between the creatures in the band as they see fit. If a banding creature attacks alone, banding does nothing. But banding on attack works very differently than banding on defense in 2 crucial ways. The first involves composition. An attack with banding must have all but 1 creature possess banding. When you band on defense, you just need 1 leader to be able to do the math your way. But when you're banding with the attack, you can do it with as many creatures as you like, but all of them except for the dumb guy have to have banding. Oh, but how do evasion abilities factor into this? I'm really glad you asked. If both attackers have evasion abilities, such as a Sarah Angel and a Mesa Pegasus, then only a flyer can block the band. If that band ran into a wall of swords, the attacker could assign all the damage to the Sarah Angel, dealing 5 to the wall and killing it. If a Mesa Pegasus attacked with a Bog Wraith against an opponent who had swamps, then they would be able to be blocked by an opposing flyer, in which case the Bog Wraith would end up dealing damage in combat. Yes, that does sound exceedingly strange. The Bog Wraith gets into a fight even though the Bog Wraith never loses Swamp Walk. It's just that if one member of the band is effectively blocked, then they both fight. And now you know almost everything there is to know about banding. Almost. Since ABU doesn't have bands with other, I'm not going to explain it today. I lost so many sanity points explaining banding, I can't afford to lose any more today. I find it interesting that red, white, and black each get a vanilla 2/2 for 3 mana. White gets Pearled Unicorn. Why does the term Grey Ogre get applied to 2/2s for 3? I can't really say. The art on Pearled Unicorn is superior in my opinion, and Scathed Zombies aren't my cup of tea. It is a mystery. For a set with so much talk of protection, I find it rather amusing that only 2 cards actually come with it built in, White Knight and Black Knight. White Knight was generally considered better because it couldn't die to Pestilence or Terror. One of the major archetypes of Microprose's Chandelar game hinged around this mechanic. One concept that has never been referenced since, Personal Incarnation, allows you, the Planeswalker, to project an aspect of yourself onto the battlefield. If you've ever wanted to enter the red zone yourself, well, I think you need to have your head looked at first. But if you do that, then you'll want to use this guy. Its stats are very efficient, a 6/6 for 6 that you can keep alive by redirecting damage to yourself at will. But if he dies, through Wrath of God or Terror or Balance, you're also losing half your life. That's a hell of a drawback. White creatures usually don't get drawbacks like this, but the flavor on this card is magnificent. As cool as Personal Incarnation is, I suppose that part of the reason Wizards stopped printing it with 5th edition is that it presupposes that the player is male. Wizards has always been pretty good about gender parity in its cards for the most part, but when the actual player is represented on the card, it gets tricky. Savannah Lion is the first 2/1 for 1 mana printed, and it had no drawbacks. Savannah Lions were fundamental in the development of White Weenie strategies. These decks used Lions and White Knights as an initial rush, then followed up when the Angel had its defense up by playing Wrath of God. The next wave was a Sarah Angel, followed by Armageddon. If the opponent was falling behind in development, you could just skip the second wave and go directly to Armageddon. White got even more damage prevention with Veteran Bodyguard, who most of my friends called Kevin, after Kevin Costner. There are a lot of cards like these, especially in civilized settings like Mercadia or Sarah's Realm. My favorite is Palisade Giant from Return to Ravnica, who protects you as well as every other creature you have. That's awesome! Sarah Angel is the most iconic creature of the set. I collect Sarah Angels. Now check this out. Here's my binder full of them. I have every first language printing of Sarah, including Russian. The Spanish 4th edition version botched it really good with Time Elementals art and border, though. Sarah Angel was the first creature printed with Vigilance, though it took a long time for the ability to get keyworded. In an era where creatures were underpowered in relation to spells, artifacts, and enchantments, Sarah Angel was the creature that made it to the top. It even got included in Weissman's The Deck, after all. And so as we finish with a classic, it's time to look back and figure out what rose to the top, both in design and in playability. Here's the top 5 coolest white cards. Number 5, Reverse Damage. Against big burn spells, this was huge card advantage in a color that normally doesn't get it. Number 4, Disenchant. The best utility player in the set, except perhaps for Terror. Number 3, White Knight. First strike, hard to remove, and cheap. One of the very best early 2-drops. Number 2, Sarah Angel. White's most iconic creature of ABU, and arguably of all time. If someone wrote a book about White, Sarah Angel would probably be on the cover. And the number 1 coolest white card in Alpha, Beta, and Unlimited is Wrath of God. The thing I love about this card is that it drags the big person into the game. Also, it enabled tons and tons of control archetypes. If you're not trying to finish the game in a hurry, then Wrath of God is right for you. It turns games around in your favor. And that brings White to a close. You can see much of the foundations of today's game in ABU's white. But if we compare white as it first started to how it has looked since, say, Invasion, the tone is different. Early white was extremely defensive and cared about protecting its own. Instead of focusing on grand martial tactics, the flavor of banding focused on friendship and teamwork. White was the color of tactics, but red was the color of war. The element of the enraged virtuous army was far softer than it is now. It didn't have a ton of flyers. And blue had more and bigger creatures than white, with 14 to 11. That doesn't seem right. I think blue should have fewer creatures. White was definitely a dominant color at the kitchen table, though, when you knew what your friends were playing and most people didn't have enough cards to play one or two decks, because getting cards in 93, 94, 95 was surprisingly hard. So Circles of Protection ended up being some of the most powerful cards in the sets, depending on your locality. Over time, white lost its peasant tone and became much more martial, especially with Mirage Block. Thanks for watching. Next show, we're going to get fired up and talk about the origins of red, the most misunderstood color of Magic. If you enjoyed this show, hammer on that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. And in case this is the first show you've watched on ABU, go and check out my links to the rest of the set. There's also tons of other sets I've covered throughout Magic's history, so I think you'll have fun watching those. This is Eli Kaplan for Ancestral Recall, signing off. Good games, and good luck.